Alright, what we're going to do here is look at some watches that share essentially the same movement. This is a Lemania movement, basically known as the 1873, although Omega refer to it as the 861 caliber. Lemania have been around for a long time. They were founded in 1918, and in 1930 they were absorbed into the SSIH group with Omega and Tissot. So they were effectively an in-house movement manufacturer, which meant Omega and Tissot used them quite extensively, most famously I guess in the case of the Speedmaster Moonwatch. They carried on making their own branded watches and movements for some time. In the 1970s, the SSIH organisation was essentially broken up and became part of the Swatch group. Lemania never actually merged with all of the other bits of the Swatch group, like the eBosches and ETA. They stayed separate, and then they were de-merged from Swatch in 1981, purchased by Breguet, and then about 18 years later Breguet was bought again by Swatch. So Swatch is now the group that owns Omega, Tissot, Breguet and a whole lot of other brands too, including what is left of Lemania. So today the Lemania movements are actually marketed by Breguet and branded by them. The predecessor to the ones that you see here was the Lemania 2310 or the 27 Cro 12 movement, which came out in 1942, and that subsequently went on to become the Omega Cal 321, which was in the watches that were tested for this, the NASA space program, and it actually still survives in variants today. Omega restarted manufacture of the Cal 321 in the year 2000, the year 2020, but under the Breguet family, that movement has shown up in all kinds of high-end watches. Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, Breguet themselves. There's a whole load of companies that use a movement that's essentially based on the 2310 or the 2320 Lemania movement. That the 2320 had a higher jewel count than the 17 jewels that were in the 2310. Anyway, the successor to this 2310 or 27 Cro 12, or as Omega called it, 321, was the Lemania 1873, and it arrived in 1965. Now it was a different architecture, so the 321 or 2310 movement was a column wheel chronograph. The 1873 was a shuttle cam system, but it traces its lineage back to the same parentage essentially. So what we have here on the left is a 1971 Omega Speedmaster, so it's reference 145.02271, and that is, like I said, probably the most famous usage of the 861 movement, as Omega calls it, or the Lemania 1873 base. The one in the middle is a Tissot chronograph from around 1970, quite hard to date exactly, but it's about the same age as the Speedmaster, and it's quite a lot smaller in terms of the case diameter, so it's quite surprising that the Speedmaster is a 40mm case and the Tissot I think is 37, and yet it's essentially the same movement inside, finished in a different way. So Omega put various platings and what have you on their movement, but as we'll see in a minute, it's clearly identifiable as pretty much the same thing. And then on the far right is a Heuer branded watch from Tag Heuer. So in the late 1990s, they decided to issue a series of classic watches, essentially re-editions of the Heuer Carrera from 1964. So the case size and shape is almost identical to the original Carrera case. It's only 36mm across, and Tag Heuer, as they were obviously at the time, bought in Lemania movements to put into the chronographs in that range of watches. So this CS3111 watch that's on show here is essentially the same movement inside as well, which again we'll see in a minute. So let's just take a look at the back of these watches now. So the Speedmaster, because it was dated to 1971 and after the moon landing, it had the flight qualified by NASA for all space flights inscription on the back of it. It's a screw down case back on the Speedmaster, and these notches basically lock a tool to take the thing off. It's a good idea to use a correct tool rather than a cheap eBay job if you're going to do this a lot. So this is a solid brass one that's manufactured by a guy called Pahawi from the Omega forums, so they're a really good quality piece of kit, and in fact the same sort of tools are quite commonly used on other watches too. On the Tissot in the middle, this is also a screw down, but it doesn't have anywhere to get purchase on the case back. And this particular watch, when I first got it, it was really tight. You couldn't use any kind of pressure to get it off. Gave it to a watchmaker, he basically returned it and said he couldn't get it off either. So I ended up using a technique which is to basically super glue a socket set piece onto the back of the watch, and then use the socket lever to get the back of it off. I'll give you the link to the step-by-step instructions for that. It's not really for the faint-hearted, but if all else fails and you can't get the back of the watch off, then that's one way of doing it. And then at the end, the Heuer has, again, it's just a straight screw down case back. It's generally not a good idea to take the back off any watch. If you can avoid doing it, it's always better to not. However, I'm going to take the backs off of these just to illustrate what the movements are, because I'm basically a bit reckless in that respect. Okay, so here we see the three Lemania 1873 movements side by side, and you know, the architecture of them is essentially identical. The only difference is the materials that are used to finish some of the plates and the bridges and so on. The Speedmaster one on the left here is the most decorated, and you can obviously see the Omega stamping on the main plate here, and then Tissot and Sons here, and then Heuer on this one at the far side. But otherwise they're basically identical. All of them have a steel brake for the chronograph wheel, which we'll come on to in a little while when we talk about the differences between the various Omega movements, and these movements essentially were unchanged until from the mid-60s until depending on the application of them, until the 1980s or so. Omega have upped the jewel count in theirs. Some of the later ones have come out with rhodium plating and rose gold finishing and what have you. But by and large, it's still the same movement as was the case in the late 1960s, right up until the very latest generation of Speedmaster moon watches, which have changed the game on using a coaxial escapement. So when TAG Heuer decided to reissue the classic branded watches in the late 1990s, they first came out with the two chronograph versions over here. These are basically identical. This is a CS3110 with a silver white coloured dial, and this is the 3111, which is the black dial. There are a couple of other versions as well. Black dial with gold rings around the subdials. There's one with a gold dial as well, but these were the first ones they brought out. But they also had a bunch of other watches in the same range, which weren't really reissues or re-editions of watches that had ever existed. So this one here is a WS2113, and it was sold as a kind of Carrera automatic, which in its era in the 1960s there was no such thing. This one has an in-house movement which has a GMT hand on it as well, and it's automatic, but it's basically the same case as the other two. Now let's take a look at the back of the... So yeah, the two chronographs, basically the same back, just a Heuer shield and the serial number and the model number on them. Some of the versions which came out had engraved around the outside something along the lines of re-edition Carrera 1964, but these two don't. I think these are both from the late 90s or possibly very early 2000s, and I fitted both of them with a Heuer deployant buckle and the strap that goes with it, just because I think it suits the watch really well. And then this one here is I picked this up on eBay, and it's been engraved to Andy for 10 years service. Obviously Andy didn't like his employer enough to keep the watch, so it found its way onto eBay. I've tried getting a replacement case back for that, but it's going to be far more expensive than the watch is ever worth, so I've just left it. These are three Tissot watches from the same family, for some reason they released a whole load of different stuff under the name PR-516, different case shapes, different dial layouts, all kinds of stuff. But these are all from around 1970-71. The two chronographs are, again, like the others earlier on, they're Lemania 1873, and they are simply decorated when you compare them to the Omega Speedmaster. So Tissot was, I guess, akin to Omega, like Seat is to VW or Audi. You know, they're a sister brand, possibly a little less elaborate, aimed at a slightly different, maybe younger market. There's an awful lot of Tissot ladies' watches and not so many desirable collectible men's ones. But these are exceptions to that kind of rule. The chronographs are both case number 40528, and there were several sub-variants of that, and the principal difference here is the dial. So this one's got circular sub-dials, this one's got these kind of semi-rectangular ones, and the colouring as well is slightly different. So the one on the right is very 1970s. The one in the middle is actually quite a cool looking watch, I think. The loom on it is tritium, it's the same as the other ones as well, in fact the same as all three, and it's got a nice creamy yellow patina, and it actually looks quite fresh compared to a lot of other ones. This, on the other hand, is very much of its era. They all use the same bracelet. In fact, the cases are pretty much identical, except obviously and the one on the side here, it doesn't have pusher tubes in it. They also did a sonorous version of this that had an alarm, a mechanical alarm in it. So the one on the far left here is effectively a dive watch, although it's not really all that water resistant. It uses an in-house automatic movement, Tissot 794, and a version of this one without the day, so it just has the date wheel on it, was actually used by Roger Moore in Live and Let Die. So if you watch Live and Let Die, even though he prominently features a Rolex that's got a whole saw thing built into it and a magnetic feature, when he's driving along in his speedboat, it's very clear that he's wearing his Tissot, and it's on this exact type of bracelet as well. So the bracelets are really cool. They're quite heavy, quite chunky, and they come with a Tissot branded clasp on them as well. Okay, let's take a look at some Omega Speedmasters. I've got three to present here. So the one on the left here is a 145012 68 from 1968 or thereabouts. It's a Cal 321 movement, or the Lemania 2310, as it would have been before Omega put their stamp on it. Column wheel chronograph, and this is the very last watch you could have bought from Omega with the 321 movement in it in the original run of things. The one in the middle is the 1971 Speedmaster that we saw earlier on, 14502271, and that's the 861 movement. And the one on the far side over here is one of the later ones. It's a 14502276. So broadly speaking, the case back numbers refer to not so much when the watch was made, but when that model was introduced. So it is quite possible that a watch that says 76 on the case back was actually made in 1977 or even 78. The only way to know for sure is to get an Omega extract of the archives, which is £100 or thereabouts to get. So there are some pretty noticeable differences, although a lot of people would tell you that these things all look pretty much the same. If we look at the 321 movement watch and compare it with the one in the middle, the indices at the dial go all the way to the edge, whereas in the 71 and the 69 before that, they actually stop before the edge of the dial, and there's a little gap between that and the edge. There is an applied metal logo on the 68 one, so it's if you look at it closely, you'll see it's it stands proud of the dial, whereas in the other two here, the logo is actually just a painted Omega symbol. And there are other differences between the other two over here as well. There's a step dial, so around the edge of the 71 there's quite a noticeable step. The same thing is true of the 68, but by the time we got to 66, the dial was domed in shape. And there's some other little subtle differences too, like the font of Speedmaster is subtly different and what have you. the main things to look out for really when comparing these things and not being able to see the movement are the 68 watch is the long indices, the applied metal logo, and the dot over 90 on the bezel is one of the most desirable things. It's such a tiny difference, but it can make a £1,000, £2,000 difference to the value of the watch if it's got dot over 90, or in the case of this and that one there, these are both dot next to 90. So we'll turn them over in a second and have a look at the back. Okay, if we look at the case backs, like I mentioned earlier on, the NASA engraving came out after the moon landing had happened, but the 14501268 was actually the watch that was being worn by Michael Collins on Apollo 11 when he was in the in orbit above the moon itself. So clearly they didn't have the moon land, the NASA engraving until 1969. And there are some others. There are some variants of the 1971 which just have the hippocampus, as it's called, and they're known as the No NASA 71. So there's a few other variants out there, but by and large, anything pre-1971 has just got the basic engraving. It's a bit hard to see it in this light, so I'll try and cast a bit of shadow over. But you can see on the 1968 watch, it just says Speedmaster. It's got a hippocampus engraved motif, and then the Omega logo below it. And in terms of bracelets, the 1968 watch has a flat link Omega 1039 bracelet on it, and these are quite valuable on their own. You could easily spend £1,000 or more on one of them with the right kind of end links on it. The 71 has a trapezoid logo Omega clasp, and it's a 1171 bracelet, so it's a bit heavier. It doesn't have stretching links in it like the earlier versions, and it therefore feels a little bit more robust. These are really nice bracelets, probably the ideal bracelet for everyday wearing on a Speedmaster. And then the the one on the far side over here is actually an aftermarket bracelet. Really good quality flat link style, and it's made by Uncle Seiko, who, as the name would suggest, specialised originally in Seiko replacement bracelets, but for an everyday wear watch, that's a really good option if you particularly had a flat link and you didn't want to damage it on a genuine Speedmaster bracelet. Then an aftermarket one like this, you could wear it every day, and if it gets scratched up, then it doesn't really matter because it's only worth a relatively small amount of money. So the Speedmaster, because it was dated to 1971 and after the moon landing, it had the flight qualified by NASA for all space flights inscription on the back of it. Okay, so let's take a look at the movements in these Speedmasters. The one on the left has quite clearly got the 3-2-1 movement. You can see the shape of the bridge is quite different. It's got a column wheel chronograph movement in it instead of the cam and shuttle one, and this is basically a slightly slower beat movement. So the 3-2-1 runs at 1800 beats per hour. The 8-6-1 runs at 21.6 k beats per hour. So a lot of people would say this is the one to have if you had a choice. These movements, the 3-2-1, are significantly more expensive than the 8-6-1, and a lot of people would say they're a bit less robust. Also, spare parts supply has been something of an issue, although since Omega have started remanufacturing these, there's some debate as to whether the parts will be completely interchangeable with the originals or not, but it's possible they might actually be able to make parts that have since gone out of supply. And then the two 861s on the 1971 watch and the 76 watch, they're more or less the same, although one telltale difference is the 71 watch has a metal brake for the chronograph wheel, and I'll take a look at this in a short while as to exactly what that does. And the one over here, the 76 one, has a plastic brake known as the Delrin brake. So Delrin is just a trademark of DuPont for a particular type of synthetic material that's used in bushings and all kinds of stuff. So it's not some sort of magic property, it's just a bit of plastic. But Omega said that they changed the material for the brake because the plastic part weared other parts of the movement a bit less than the metal ones did before that. There's again some doubt as to whether that's really true. It's probably a cost-saving exercise more than anything else. But you know, if you're looking at the movement of a 71 Speedmaster, it should definitely have a metal brake. A 74 or 76 or later should have a Delrin brake. Some of the 72s have metal and some have plastic or Delrin, so there was a cutover point at some stage. Anyway, we'll look at these movements in a bit more detail shortly. Okay, a slightly closer look at the two 861 movements. I've turned them round now so that the balance wheel is at the bottom of the shot, although that's actually near 12 o'clock on the watch face itself. So again, the one on the left is the 1971 watch, and the one on the right is the 76. So again, the principal difference that's visible really is the addition of the Delrin brake. If we were to add back into this the movement from the Carrera, from the Heuer CS3111, we would see that not only does it also have the Delrin brake, but in fact it's got an extra joule in it as well, so that's moved up from 17 to 18 joules. So they've evolved this movement fairly gradually over the 50 or so years that it was in more or less continuous production as it was. So let's take a look at this brake in action. This is the 76 watch with the Delrin brake. Basically, in the normal run of things, the brake isn't engaged at all. It's only when you start the chronograph and then subsequently go to stop it before resetting it that you see the brake engages the chronograph wheel to stop it basically moving. And then if you begin the chronograph again, the brake will disengage. Start it again, it will stop it again and it will engage, and then if you reset it, you'll see the whole thing resets altogether. So there we have it. I'll look at a few Lemania 1873 based watches and some of their extended family. I think these are quite interesting. I hope you did too, and please feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions. Subscribe to look for further videos. Have a look at the vintagewatchadvisors.com website, where I posted a lot more pictures and other background information and so on. And thanks again. Bye.